I think the Western world definitely knows that it has a lot of problems. I think that it doesn't really know how many of those problems are made worse by a few common causes. I wrote an article, or co-authored an article a few years ago called The Housing Theory of Everything. And our argument was that loads of problems stem from housing shortages. So I've already talked about the economic problems, but also lower birth rates, which are going to be a huge problem for lots of reasons, but partly because of the number of elderly people we need to look after as society ages because of low birth rates. I think also just on a human level, low birth rates are a problem. If people would like to have more children, but they can't because they can't afford it or they can't find a place to live that's suitable, that's like there's a huge human cost to that doesn't show up in economic statistics, but is really, really, really important. And housing shortages are a huge, huge, huge part of that. Environmental effects, climate change is made worse by people living in sprawling cities because they drive a lot rather than denser ones. I am, incidentally, to be clear, I am not against cars. Lots of people who like housing in cities have a big problem with cars. I think cars are great. I think everybody should be able to own a car if they want to own a car. Great, good for you. However, it is just the case that people, even people who own a car and who like cars, like living in dense walkable areas. Not everybody, and if you don't like that, then there'll be plenty of homes for you as well. I'm in favor of building homes of all shapes and sizes, but just looking at the type of housing that gets highly priced and highly valued, it's housing in dense walkable areas. It's like Brooklyn brownstones, and it's the really lovely old parts of Boston that are really, really different in terms of how one is living to many other parts of America. Again, nothing against suburbia. It's great in many ways. It's quite good if you're raising children. Having a garden is great, but people really, really, really want the housing that we're not really building. And the happy benefit of that is that their CO2 emissions are much lower if they live in that kind of way, because they get public transport, which is more efficient and often is electricity driven. They're healthier because they're walking more. They, I would say, often have a much nicer life because they're like around people that they like. So there are loads of benefits, I think, to building more that we don't see. I do want to be careful because I don't want to sound like a crank and claim that like all our problems would be solved if we did this. I don't think that. I think like climate change would still be a really big problem, but it would help. It would help. And economic growth is such a kind of master tool. Like it's a master key. It allows you to do, when you have economic growth, you can solve loads of other problems. When you have growth, you can build prisons and put criminals in prisons. So growth helps you solve crime. When you have growth, you can do public service reform, and you can buy off people with big, nice redundancy packages, and you can make your public services more efficient. When you have growth, you can invest in research and development and maybe improve the quality of the batteries that you're getting or something like that. I don't know. Growth really, really, really does allow you to solve loads of other problems. And my view is that the very weak economic growth that most Western countries have experienced over recent decades is like the core cause of all the other problems we've got. So yeah, I basically think that we need two things, and I am trying to do these two things. So I'm not just sort of saying other people should do this. One is we need totally invisible ways of getting a bit of growth that don't require very much political capital, and basically are like pump priming growth. So I think housing is a really good area for this, where you can design housing policies, I think, that don't actually need a lot of political fighting and will get you more housing. And I think you will get more growth from that. And I think there are a few other areas. This is why I stress like high leverage changes, where like you can do a small change and you have a big impact. Because I think that the context of growth, of economic growth, is really what gives people confidence in the future, and it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. One of my favorite politicians of the last half century is a guy called Roger Douglas, who did like Thatcherite reforms in New Zealand, but times 5. Like if in New Zealand everybody knows him. He's a very interesting and very inspirational man. Incidentally, was from the Labour Party, so did a lot of these market reforms, but from a kind of a left-wing party, which is, I think, quite interesting. But he has this expression that you have to let the dog see the rabbit, which is a dog racing expression. And it means that people very rarely like vote for promises of growth, but they will vote for continued growth. If they can feel growth, then they're much more optimistic and they're much more willing to say, like, let's continue doing things and let's do more things that will grow the pie, because like we can see where this is going and we can see what this feels like. It's when you get what we've had in most Western countries, sclerosis and stagnation for a long period of time, people kind of forget that things can get better and they end up basically just, life becomes a zero-sum game, and we know what that can lead to in policy terms. So one thing we need is that, like, one thing we need is just stuff that doesn't require you to win an election, that will get growth and hopefully make it easier to get people to believe in growth again. Another thing that I think is kind of on the opposite end is elites, people who spend all their time or most of their time or a lot of their time talking about politics and talking about these kinds of ideas. We need them to prioritize growth above everything else. In the UK, there are like a dozen things that people would say are like the most important thing, like climate change, geographical inequality, like some parts of the country being poorer than others. There are lots and lots and lots of things that people would say are the most important priority. Net zero is one of the really big ones. None of that is like relevant if you don't have growth. None of that, like, good luck trying to do anything meaningful on regional inequality if you don't have growth. Good luck trying to do anything meaningful on net zero that doesn't involve completely immiserating your country if you don't have growth. And the trouble is that because very few elites do prioritize growth in that way, it's very hard for there to be any unpopular movement that would get you like big stuff that would also get you a lot of growth. You can't all do it. You can't do it all via sneaky little tricks that nobody really notices. So I think you need a kind of elite bargain. Like, I think you need people on both sides or all sides to say, we have to do this. We don't like each other, but we're not going to opportunistically attack you if you're in government and you do these unpopular things if we think that there's a good chance that they'll get growth, because we all accept that we have to do this. Like, we all accept that this is just table stakes for this country not going off a cliff. And there's an economist called Stefan Durkin who has argued that this is what happens in developing countries that do manage to grow. That basically what the elites in those countries say, like, we're fed up with being a poor country, and we're just going to agree that we have a kind of cross-party consensus that we need to do these things to get growth. And we'll keep fighting all the other issues, like politics doesn't stop happening, but we're going to agree on these ones. And I think you had something like that in Ireland when Ireland grew. I think you had something like that in South Korea when that grew, and in some other countries as well. And it's countries where you don't get that, where you just never get out of the barrel. You're all just like crabs in a barrel pulling each other down every time one tries to escape. And that's a different challenge altogether. That's a challenge of persuasion, of culture, of status, of making it high status to believe in growth and to argue for growth, and making it kind of a joke to prioritize, let's just say, net zero over growth. And that's not easy, but I think it's important. And that's the cultural shift I would say is most important.